Hi, everyone, and welcome to MGAC Inner Voices, a podcast digging into issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. I'm Bryan Gamez, one of your co-hosts for the podcast, a project manager at MGAC, working and living in sunny LA. As always, I just want to preface this podcast by letting everyone know that I'm not an expert in all things diversity, equity, and inclusion. My guest isn't either. We just want to share our stories and discuss how together we can create a better outcome for all of us in the AEC industry. And today we have a very special guest. We'll be speaking with Louise Sharp, a principal at HLW. She's had a very lengthy career that spans several continents. She currently leads the Santa Monica HLW practice, and I'm just so excited to speak with her today. So, Louise, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Brian. Thank you for having me. Yes, I am Louise Sharp and based in the Santa Monica office. As you said, I'm a design principal and my focus is really interior architecture. So that's where I have been focused for many years now. And as you mentioned, I've worked in several countries at this point. So have been in the professional industry for probably over 25 years, but who's counting, right? So
I'm not.
thank you.
So, I want to know how you started your career in architecture.
So, a huge part of me is my background because I'm from New Zealand originally, and that's where I grew up. And where I think, it's always hard when you lived in multiple places and people are like, where are you from? I mean, I'm clearly, my accent is not American, right? So it always leads to this interesting conversation because I've lived here for 23 years at this point, and I am an American citizen, but I'm more of a global citizen, I think. So life started in New Zealand, and then I left there when I was in my early 20s just to travel because we're so far away from the rest of the world. And I think all Kiwis, as we're known, are very curious by nature to see what else is out there. So I left New Zealand and I moved to the UK, which is where my father was
Wow.
from, and ended up living and working there for quite a few years. So I started working in an architectural practice, quite a large practice, but doing administrative and marketing work. So not on the design side at all, although that's something I knew I really wanted to do, but didn't have the opportunity to study that in New Zealand because there was definitely more limited courses and the length of the course
Mhm.
was extremely long. And when you're 17, 7 years seems like a really long time to study architecture.
Oh my God, it's 7 years in New Zealand?
Yeah, you do
Wow.
4 years, then you go off and do your internship, and then you go back. So it may have changed now, but that's what it was at the time. And, I think I was just eager to get out and see the rest of the world. So kind of put it on pause, went and traveled. And then as I was working at this architectural practice, saw that there was opportunities to study in the UK, and I was eligible to do that at the time. So I ended up going back to college in my late 20s to study design at Cardiff Institute of Design and Architecture. Yeah.
That's amazing. Were you always interested in design and when you were in New Zealand? And so when you had the opportunity to work in the UK, you just obviously jumped at it, right?
Hmm.
Did you have any opportunities or did you have any mentors that helped you along the way or like helped you get your foot in the door? Because I mean, this was, I
Mm.
would say, when was this? You said in the 90s?
Yeah, it was in the 90s. Yes, I mean I did. No, thanks for reminding me.
Sorry, Louise.
No, 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 no. Yeah, so as I said, I worked in a much more administrative capacity in the office, but got to know all the partners and principals and senior leadership in the practice. And so they were very supportive of my journey to study. And when I finished, the managing partner at the time said, would I like to display my work in the office? And so I was able to do that. And then one of their staff members was taking a leave of absence. And so he asked me if I'd like to come and work to replace this designer while she was out. And then 5, 6 years later, I was still there. So I've always had that encouragement and that support in terms of, getting into the industry, but a little bit of a different way of doing it, right? Kind of seeing the other side
Right.
of the business and then deciding it was something I wanted to go and do.
Did you ever feel that when you started, you had any obstacles or challenges to grow, or was it always just you always felt like there was a comfort of people, you had a great support system? Because it sounds like you did. It sounds like,
Mhm, mhm.
and that's what I love to hear.
No, I think I did. I mean, at the time, the practice that I worked for had engineering and architecture. It was definitely much more male dominated than female. But I
Mhm.
had two great mentors that I worked with who were both, very senior on the design side, had been in the industry for many years and were great role models to me, both of whom are now retired, but I remain friends with them. And I think they taught me so much about how to lead. In fact, I still remember to this day the very first presentation that I went to with one of them to present materials and finishes, and just looking at her in awe as to how she presented that so confidently. But again, it's having those people who you can watch and learn from and who bring you into the process in a way that's
Mhm.
supportive, not calling you out, but really assisting you. Sometimes you have to jump in the deep end a little bit,
Yeah,
but
and
knowing
that's
that you're
fine.
not knowing that you're not gonna drown, there's someone there to help you when you need it. But yeah, they were great role models, and I think especially looking to their style of leadership really gave me a lot to aspire to.
So I know there's quite a bit of difference now from when you started
Mhm.
and how architecture firms are led. I think that the architecture industry, construction industry has gotten more diverse, right? Everyone's more conscious about it. But in that time when you started, what was the leadership style like? Do you ever felt like there was ever a time when you saw a female in power or in the C suite and you were like, I don't want to approach my practice in that way? Or I
Mhm.
mean, do you have any of those anecdotes that you
Yeah.
can talk about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the practice that I'm talking about at the time had no female principals. The CFO, however, was a female and she was from New Zealand. So,
Oh wow.
interestingly enough, yeah, the CFO was female, very kind of unusual, but no female partners,
If I
just
were you, I'd be very happy to like
yeah.
see that. I'd be like, wow, I feel so seen.
Exactly. I remember her taking me to New Zealand House because she was, which is the embassy in New Zealand. She was part of that and like being,
Oh,
oh, so no, I mean, she was certainly a great role model. But it's interesting because it was both interiors and architecture and engineering in that practice. And I think, often common times, even you'll see interior architecture being a little undermined as opposed to architecture. And I think there's still some of that
yes.
today as well, right? I think what we do as interior architects in practice is as critical. It really informs the way that people interact with space, and there are life safety issues as well. So
Absolutely.
it's a critically important aspect still, but again, it was definitely much more male dominated. Even the construction, I don't think I ever saw one female on site from the construction side, for many years into my tenure as a designer. But again, having seen my mentors and the way that they interacted and reacted and led with such, I think, confidence and humor, and really strive to create authentic connections with their clients, many whom became their friends and my friends. I think that was a really vital lesson in terms of learning how to connect with people. It's not just superficial, it can be really open and honest. And I think honesty as
Right.
well is another really key way of communicating. We don't always know all the answers. There are times when we don't have the answer on the spot,
Right.
right? So knowing when is the right time to just say, I need a minute, I'll get back to you is, I think, also really important. Don't try to pretend you know everything.
Yeah, I think even today that
Mhm.
there's been times even I've been in the industry for, I guess, approaching 9 years now, 8, 9 years. And I've always seen such a difference in style between men and women. I think females tend to lead with a little bit more compassion, a little
Mhm.
bit more empathy. And I think that goes a long way, especially in the workplace. A lot of
Yeah.
my PMs before Louise were females, and I've always just looked up to them. Being as a gay male,
Mhm.
there's always been a special connection to women who have always been so supportive of me growing up.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that the way that you're describing your career beginnings resonates with me because of that fact, right? That they were so confident, and I'm sure it wasn't easy, right?
Yeah. Oh,
It's
yeah.
never easy to
Mhm.
be at that time, and I'm also. It's probably not easy now, too, right, Louise?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the industry's changed, but there are many factors that are definitely still the same, and I've seen both sides of that, right? I've also seen a side of a generation of women before me who felt like they've had to lead in a way that, like you said, might be more of a style that one of their male colleagues might have demonstrated, and that they've
Right.
had to feel that that's the way they've had to lead in order to succeed, which I think, part of me understands that you're trying to fit in, but at the same time, I don't feel like we as women should have to do that. I think everyone needs to find our own style of leadership. And again, something
Yeah.
that's resonates with them. Don't try to be someone or something that you're not. I think you'll find the right clients and the right projects by being true to who you are, not by pretending to be someone that you're not, right? Because, it all comes out in the end. And I think it creates a better experience for everyone. And again, like leading with compassion and kindness isn't always the most respected way, perhaps, but I think for me, it's always been a critical style of collaborating and leading because, I've had people who've been like that for me, and I've found that it's really brought out the best in me. It's made me want to
Yeah.
succeed and do more. And I've had the same experience in working with my colleagues and many of them who I'd call friends in the industry just by being supportive of one another.
And folks, I just have to say, Louise is a very elegant designer, elegant principal, and the way that she leads her projects is just, it's great. I think your team responds to it, Louise. And I
Thank
think
you.
that's what it's all about as we continue through the coming years. I think diversity, equity, inclusion isn't only just going to be DEI. I also think it's going to be about belonging, right? It's going to be
Yes.
DEI
Hmm.
B, and you
Mm, mm,
provide that belonging to your
hmm.
staff, Louise. And
Yeah, I
that's really
mean,
important.
we all want to be part of a culture, part of a tribe, part of a group of people that we feel connected to. I feel like I've always had better outcomes in terms of everything that we've done, and particularly in design, with having diverse points of view. I mean, because the way that you think about something, or I think about something, or someone else is always going to be different. But that's the beauty of
Mhm.
what we do, right? And is bringing all of those points of view together, having an open and honest conversation, and seeing what evolves from that. To me, that's what's really exciting about design. I don't want to just put heads down, go at it and say, here it
Mhm.
is. That's not what's exciting for me. Even when a client looks at a design and said, oh, I really want to do this, that, or the other. It's easy to be disappointed as a designer because, you kind of put your heart and
Right.
soul into it, perhaps. But
Yeah.
again, I've always found it interesting to hear their point of view about it and have a discussion about it and give you the opportunity to rethink it. It's not always easy, but it's a different type of challenge when you're designing to come up with a different solution, but also one that you're equally proud of and equally passionate about, right? That's what's kept me interested, I think, in designing for so long, is that aspect, and just being able to work with lots of different people, seeing new young designers come into the industry who
Yeah.
bring a new energy and a new passion, which keeps me going because I'm sometimes feel like oh, I'm running out of juice here. So
Never, Louise.
yeah.
I want to come back to that because I think that's a really important aspect of what I wanted to delve into this
Hmm.
podcast, right? I want to come back to the opportunities that you provide to the younger generation. But I also want to touch upon, you've worked in the UK. You also have worked in China, Shanghai,
Hmm.
China. I'm not sure if I can call it a stint. You did work a few years there,
Yes.
but what was the experience like in China for a female like
Hmm.
yourself?
Very interesting,
And it's a
clearly.
different culture, very,
It's
yeah.
a very different culture. Well, it's interesting because you suddenly see things very differently. I didn't understand the language at all. I couldn't speak a
Wait,
lick of
what?
Mandarin. Nope.
How did
Um,
you get to Shanghai without speaking Mandarin, Louise?
sign language, body
Yeah.
language. I
Oh,
don't
design. It
know.
was the design.
It was, well, thank goodness I could draw, right? Because I
Yes,
remember the
exactly.
very first week, and it all happened very quickly. I ended up being there for 5 years, but I got there. We were designing this project. We were doing quite a few all-nighters, and my colleagues at the time didn't speak a lot of English. As I said, I didn't speak any Mandarin, so we would draw to explain things. Thank goodness there's a different type of language that we can all relate to, right? But I think for me, that experience taught me many things, one of which is to rely on all my other senses. When you're presenting to a client and one of my colleagues would be translating and I'd be watching my client, hearing what they are saying, but not understanding. So I would be looking at their reactions to things. And sometimes I would turn to my colleague and say, "Oh, so they didn't like the staircase here, but they thought about this being," and he'd look at me and like, how did you know? Like he was saying that. I was like, "Well, I don't know. I'm making some assumptions based on just the whole body language and pointing and everything." So
Right.
it's interesting when you start to rely on more than just verbal communication. That was a skill that I think was learned, and just how important those different forms of communication are. It was a very interesting experience, but also
And
culturally, obviously, just learning what's acceptable in terms of behaviors. And actually, surprisingly, perhaps, maybe because of their kind of historical background, the managing director of our Shanghai office for many years was a female, right?
oh,
So
interesting.
it would often be the case that,
And this is with HLW, correct?
yes, this is with
Okay.
HRW. We'd had an office there for probably at the time 20 plus years. So I think I always felt very accepted in China as a female, foreign female, and a designer or architect. I think there was a level of respect there, which maybe is, all Asian cultures are very different, but definitely in China. And I think, and again, maybe because of what they'd gone through historically, there was more of a level playing field, perhaps.
Hmm.
Um, so that was an interesting experience.
Would you ever go back to China?
What's fascinating is it changes so quickly. So I'm sure since I left, which is now 7.5 years ago, everything is very, very different. And obviously there's a lot
I'm
that's gone
sure.
on recently. So yeah, I'd love to go back to visit and see what's new. And I think design has evolved enormously in China. I remember when I first went there, interiors and tenant improvement projects weren't a focus because leases for maybe were for 3 to 5 years. So people didn't spend a lot of money on doing build
Mhm,
outs or design. And that has been changing. So there's been a lot more awareness of the value of what an interior can provide as an experience for everyone.
mhm.
And you can see it just in all the designs that's been published recently. I think, they're very much at the forefront of leading design and design thinking.
Yeah, and I think now interiors practices are such a large segment of the sector, right? I
Hmm.
think,
Hmm.
and as we
Yeah.
continue, we'll see that. And I think, architecture and interiors, as you said at the very beginning of this podcast, in my opinion, go hand in hand.
Yes.
Since I've entered the workforce, it's always been hand in hand. I don't think that, right, we do have ground up, but I think it's just the space that is created for TIs is just as important as the structure and the ground up. So now I want to shift the focus to the future of architecture interior practices. You've
Mhm.
been a principal now for a few years, Louise, and as you move through your principalship, what opportunities have you been able to present to others, being that you've been so self-aware of the importance of DEI?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to be very conscious of building a culture that is fully inclusive, but you have to support that happening. It doesn't happen just
Oh,
unconsciously, I don't think. So, again, it's a conscious effort, but I see so much the benefit of it that I wouldn't want to do it otherwise. Right. And I think working for an organization who supports that and working with other principals who support that goal is really critical. But, it's not just about surrounding yourself. It's also, once you have people in your organization, really giving them a voice. We
yes.
always talk about the idea that the best idea can come from anyone. It could be come from the intern, could come from the office manager, it could come from me. And I think just as a senior person, you need to really allow a platform and a voice to those within the organization, in whatever format it is. It could be in your internal meetings. I mean, I think it's really critical for junior designers and staff to be in client meetings so that they can understand how those interactions unfold.
Hmm.
The responsibility that comes with working directly with a client and seeing it is very different than me saying, "Oh, the client asked for this, and can you do it?" Right? If they hear it from the client and are part of the experience and feel ownership of it, I think it's so much more enriching for everyone. So I think also, as an industry, we need to do a lot more to start those conversations early on, to go to schools and say, this is something that's attainable. This is something, look, that you can think is possible. And I think even for me, growing up, I didn't know any female architects. I knew an architect, but it seemed, that, oh, so much mathematics involved, so much time
Right.
involved. It did
Right.
seem a little unattainable when you're 16, 15, 16, 17. So hearing more people talk about it, we, I think, have a great group of junior designers who themselves are already going out into the industry. We've had programs with Santa Monica College to just do student charrettes and really help them understand and hear from other designers who maybe have recently graduated what it's really like to work for a
Right.
practice, to hear from senior designers or leaders how they progress through the industry. So there's always more that we can do to help create the right platforms.
And I love that you're saying that you want to give the younger designers a platform. I think what's just struck me right now was how you said you want to give them a voice.
Mhm.
That is so important because now, and as you know, Gen Z is
Mhm.
as they enter the workforce, they are going to really change the industry, and I think they really want to be seen and have that sense of belonging.
Mhm.
So it sounds like at HLW, you really have created a culture of inclusivity. You touched upon it kind of briefly, but what do you think are the benefits to diversity? And I'll tell you this,
Mm.
Louise, I recently had a conversation
Mhm.
with someone who said they didn't want to be part of diversity. They didn't want to be,
Mm.
they didn't want to even see it. They were like, just
Wow.
do it in your corner. They didn't
Wow.
see the importance of it. And that's
Wow.
why I think having these conversations are so important because diversity is critical to
Yeah.
growth and to the economy.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine that. It's
It
just
was a, it
it
was a, it was a, it struck me. But I want
mm,
to know if we could talk about the benefits of diversity because
absolutely.
I think people need to hear this.
Yeah. I've always enjoyed working in cities.
Mhm.
London, New York, Shanghai, Los Angeles. And I think for me, one of the reasons I enjoy living in those cities is they're diverse, right? I guess you may not be able to say that for everywhere geographically, but I think for most of the capitals of the world, they are
Yep.
diverse, right? And I think it's so much enriched as an experience of a life experience by experiencing all of that. But in terms of design, look, there's no denying it. People who work in an office or people who experience a space are from all sorts of different backgrounds. So there are different ways of approaching that. I mean, I think we call it universal design. It
Mhm.
can be everything from the way that you light a conference room. Lighting is a critical part of design. Every skin tone reflects differently in terms of lighting,
Right.
right? So, for many of our clients who are really at the forefront of thinking diversity, they've spent a lot of time, and we've spent a lot of time with them researching, what is the best solutions, whether it comes to, you know, paint colors, lighting levels, finishes in those rooms. What about wayfinding? We all navigate space differently. Some of us navigate through form and shape, through even if you navigate through a city, it might be through monuments or landmarks, right? So we navigate
Right.
space in the same way. Maybe if you're visually impaired, you might be using a cane, and the flooring changes and a material change might indicate to you that you're in a circulation space versus a team neighborhood space, right? So we have to think about that as designers because we're designing for diverse communities, and I don't see how we can't. But having said that, I don't fully understand what it's like to navigate space in a way other than how I know. So
Yeah.
that's why having a diverse group of people with different experiences as part of designing a space is so critical because they will bring a different way of looking at it than I will. We all bring a
It's
bias of some kind or another, right? And I think the way that we can help with that is bringing different people into the conversation.
Louise, this is going to sound so cheesy and so
Mhm.
cliche, but the way you were just speaking about design and the importance of diversity and how it lends itself to the space, it made me kind of a kind of emotional because it means a lot. Like I'm
Mhm.
Latino, wayfinding, you're right. It's different per person. And it struck me when you said the floor finishes, right? If you're
Mhm.
disabled,
Mhm.
my father is 100% blind. And
Mhm.
I don't know how my father he navigates the world
Yeah.
because he just has a cane.
Mhm.
And, truncated domes are on, right? It's mostly civil plans, right? It's site
Mhm.
concrete, but
Mhm.
once you get into a space, right, we have signage that has braille on it.
Yep.
But it's such a critical component of design and even a part of diversity that people forget about.
Mhm.
That it's not just about your skin tone, and it's also about being inclusive for
Yes.
everyone, and especially who disabled, because that's why we have the ADA Act, right? It's so important to me.
Yeah.
I always make sure that when we do have final inspections, that everything is to the ADA, because I always think of like my personal relationship to it with my
Mhm.
father.
Mhm.
So that really just made, I just feel like you're talking about design so eloquently, and you have such a passion for it. When I think of you, I think of a passionate architect, designer, principal who just leads her projects very well. And I think, I want you to just take the compliment right now, Louise,
Well,
because I'm
thank
just
you.
like, anyways, but
Thanks, Brian. I mean, look, I think sometimes I wouldn't be doing this still if I wasn't passionate about it, right? But I think what keeps me passionate about it is there's always something new to learn. And, I learn from other people, right? I learn
yes.
from, you never know where you're going to learn something from. If I knew it all, I probably wouldn't still be doing it. And that's what, kind of brings me joy and keeps me so engrossed in design is there's always something new to learn. And then, and now it's new tools to learn and new ways
Mhm.
of doing things. So just keep
I
on
mean,
learning.
if there's any clients or anyone that's listening out there, I mean, HLW does it all right here.
We
I mean,
try.
like, this is the project team you would be working with.
Yep. Yep.
We've talked about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace. I want to be sure that we lend a voice to people who want to enter
Hmm.
the industry. There's another gay man who just graduated college, and he came up to me. He's like, "How do you do it? How do you work in construction? It doesn't seem very open." And I'm like, "Well, I've been very blessed to have worked with such supportive people. I didn't project the stereotypes onto the industry because I thought that would be detrimental to myself.
Hmm.
And it has actually surprised me in very many ways." What would you say to someone who is graduating college and wants to
Hmm.
step into the industry, but they're scared of the fact that maybe architects are still dominated by males?
Well, the only way to change it is for for
Yes.
more of us to be involved, right? And so I think reach out to people who you feel like may be able to help you. I think don't
Mhm.
be afraid to reach out if you see someone at anything, whether it's on Instagram or speaking at a conference or here's this podcast. Reach out and see if someone will talk to you or make an introduction. I mean, you'll be amazed. I remember when I moved from London to New York, I didn't know anyone in New York. I just decided I wanted to move to America. I didn't really even know about the visa process, right? Um, but it was a time before email, so I wrote 20 letters, posted my letters, got to New York, made some phone calls from the payphones, and had all these interviews, right? And I was amazed how welcoming people were and that they would refer me. Like they would be, oh, sorry, we're really busy at the moment. Oh, but I've heard of this other architect who may be looking for someone. Would you like me to call them for you and introduce you? I'll be like, yes. And in fact,
Yes.
that's how I ended up at, the first practice that I worked for in New York was through two referrals and being persistent and just asking people. And I think the industry may seem a little unapproachable sometimes, but when you connect with an individual, and if it's not the right individual, move on to the next one, you will find
Right.
someone that you can create a personal connection with. And if they can't help you, may be able to connect you with someone else who can help you. So, yeah.
And it goes back to mentorship, right,
Mhm,
Louise?
mhm. Yeah,
The importance of mentorship, and Louise wouldn't be where she's at today without her mentors.
absolutely. No, I feel like I have been very fortunate because I've had a lot of amazing female role models in my career, which may seem surprising, but maybe I've also looked for them. I think that's the other thing. I remember when I interviewed for a position at one time, I was interviewing with multiple firms. And one of them I interviewed all male, another one was a mix, and the other one was all female. And that
Oh
was a part of
wow.
my decision making in terms of the company that I chose eventually to work with was who I was interviewing, what they were saying, and the role models that I thought I would have there. So look
Right.
for the role models that you feel connected to, who feel like will be supportive of you and that you can kind of recognize.
That's a good point. I want them to also remember that they're not just interviewing you,
Hmm.
right?
Oh,
You're
totally.
also interviewing them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want anyone who is young, don't sell yourself short, right?
No.
Like you bring an asset to the table and that's why they're interviewing you. So you always want
Hmm.
to be sure that it's the right fit. I'm guilty of this. I've had an experience where, I went somewhere and it wasn't the right fit, but
Hmm.
I always ask the right questions
Yeah.
and then you will eventually find that. I think
Mhm.
Louise hits the nail right on the head there. And networking is important. And if you ever feel like you can't reach out, don't doubt yourself and just do it. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that, right, Louise?
Yeah. And someone can only say no, you know?
Yeah. And then you move on.
And then you
That's
move
okay.
on, exactly, and a lesson learned, and that's what it's all about.
One of my final questions for you,
Mm.
Louise, I want to wrap up here. Where do you see architects, construction, engineering in the next 10 years? Let's say 2033.
Oof, wow. Well,
Where would you like to see it go? Where do you think
um,
HLW will be in 10 years?
oh my God, the big questions, Brian. Well, I think I don't even know that we can imagine. Well, we can imagine maybe, but I think things are changing so rapidly. I think technology is evolving so rapidly. I think what
AI.
AI, yes. Even the way that we, put presentations together. But look, we're still designing for an experience of space, whether it's a physical space or a virtual space. We're still designing for somewhere that people want to spend some time, right?
Mhm.
And what will make people want to spend time in that space? And I think that doesn't change regardless of whether it's a physical or a virtual space. Maybe the tools with which we do it will. Maybe it will happen more rapidly. But I think there's still a craft and a beauty about it. And I hope we are still doing something in person together somewhere.
Just as diverse too and inclusive. I
Yes.
think it'll will be.
I
Well,
I look, I'm hopeful that it will be more so than ever. I think our industry can and does move slowly, but I think, the more people who we have supporting, and that's not just the architects, but that's the clients asking for
mhm,
diverse groups of.
which they're doing more of now
Yeah,
too.
exactly. For the construction industry to be more diverse, to have, construction managers and sub consultants who also bring diversity to the table. It's just going to make
Right.
for a richer experience for all of us.
I hope that's where we're at too. And with this, people like you and I will make sure of it too,
Yeah.
Louise.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, well, I want to wrap up there. I love speaking with you, Louise. If you want to reach out to us, please do so. But I am so thankful for having you on tonight, Louise. I hope we get to speak again.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
Well, no, just thank you for giving me the opportunity to think about this, and to speak with
Of
you about
course.
it. It's been great, and I said anyone who is thinking about joining the industry, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Well, with that, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of MGAC Voices. Check back next month for our next episode. Bye, everyone.